back November 19th, 2013 on Connecticut Morning. As you can see, I'm locked and loaded. I've got my computer up with the graphics, and I am so excited about seeing these pictures that our good friend Lou Sabini has sent along. Lou has been a guest on this show before. He is a film historian. He is a treasure trove, as Howard Cosell would say, a cornucopia of movie knowledge. And Lou lives and breathes every moment of this, and I'm just so happy to have him here today. He's involved in a few new projects, and there's a couple of the others he's finishing up with, and we're going to have a terrific discussion. Lou, good morning. How are you today?
Good, Tony. How are you today?
Oh, just fine, just fine. And we have new people all the time, and when these videos are processed and actually put onto our channel, we get comments from just about everywhere all across the globe. And saying that, not everyone who has been here previously we have new people really here for the first time, is really what I'm trying to say. And tell us how you got involved in the whole pursuit of the classic film, if you will.
Well, I guess it was just pretty much growing up in the 1950s and, watching a lot of TV. I used to watch a lot of cartoons as a kid, like most kids did. Laurel and Hardy, Abbott and Costello, the Three Stooges, and the Our Gang comedies. They were all, very close to my heart as a kid. And, then after a while I started seeing, other films, the East Side Kids, and, I'd see a movie like Angels with Dirty Faces, where it would feature James Cagney in the film, and I would think, wow, this guy is pretty cool. So I would start watching a lot of Cagney movies, and then I'd see Humphrey Bogart in a Cagney movie, and I'd recognize him. So that's pretty much how it grew, and it kept on growing. It's still growing, as a matter of fact, to this day.
Well, and what's really funny when you stop to think about it is we see these things now: the Little Rascals, Laurel and Hardy, the Three Stooges, the East Side Kids, the Bowery Boys, classic, fine works of days gone by. Channel 5 and Channel 11 in New York, and we're watching it thinking it's the greatest things in sliced bread. They're running this stuff back then as just pure fill. They didn't have the budgets to do their own shows. So,
Right.
It's like, and people like you and like me, we watched it, and we really, took it with us and are taking it forward. And I find that to be amazing. I really just don't know the monster oftentimes these people have created. But and we've had these discussions about, being in Stamford. We had several of those classic theaters. My dad, who was in the movie business, worked in just about all of them. And I know on the My Real Life movie board on Facebook, we were talking about the old Plaza Theater in really a part of Stamford, which I guess isn't even there anymore. It's the old Main Street, which I guess the mall kind of lays on half of it, and you could see part of it, but not really the other half. And that was just really the marquee of that, and the lettering. It really was an Art Deco masterpiece. That's just I guess it must torn down probably about 1990 or so, if I have that right.
I think it might have been a little earlier than that. Mm-hmm. The Plaza you're talking about?
Yes.
No, I think that was with Urban Renewal. No. It was still there. I guess it was still there I think around 1980, actually, it was torn down. I could be wrong. But I remember in 1967, I saw a reissue of The African Queen there. And that was the first time I'd ever seen that film, and I just loved that movie. It was really an experience. But then we all know what happened to the Plaza Theater after that. It turned into an adult theater, so to speak. And then shortly after that, it was torn down. But there were other theaters like the Strand and the Rialto,
right?
Which I vaguely remember the Strand. I think I might have been there once. And the Rialto, I believe, had already had closed down when I noticed it. But I remember it was a deserted building for many years, and we used to drive by it when I was a kid with my parents. So.
Yeah, it's a similar thing here. And then there were several others we were talking about last week. The Alhambra was one, and then there was another one. Was it Majestic? I'm trying to remember.
I believe so. I remember the Alhambra that Dan Burke had posted on, if you're really from Stamford, Connecticut, and I found that very interesting. It's just amazing the history, that Dan does. I mean, he just delves so much into the history of our city of Stamford, and I just love it.
And it
works for, and a lot of it he could put on My Real Life, too, which I think we should talk about that. My Real Life.
Yeah, now tell us really, what was the, shall we say, the impetus for getting that started, and for my benefit, particularly, because as you know, I've kind of, well, shall we say, some of my postings might have some chalk flying either way of the line. What particular period are we looking at in My Real Life, and what caused you to do it, and what is what is really the subject matter of the films and the actors that we're discussing on the board?
Okay, well, what happened was I was out in California filming a documentary, and I had received an email from Dan Burke, and I've known Dan for 40 years, and he, of course, we all know he works at the Stamford Historical Society, and we would go out to lunch every so often, and Dan would just enjoy listening to me talking about old movies. I don't know why, but it's obvious he likes them too. So he emailed me and he said, Lou, I'd like to start a group called My Real Life, and that's REEL, Life. And I want it to be pretty much about you and what you love, old movies. And I said to him, well, Dan, it's going to take a lot of work, and I don't know whether I really have the time. And it is a lot of work. Anyhow, he put together a group for me, and he showed me an example of it. And I said, sure, let's try it. And we're a little over 2 months old, and we have close to 300 members on our group. And we're on Facebook. And pretty much we deal, the years that we cover are from the beginning of film to 1965, 66, right before the rating system came in. That was really in 66, 67. Because, that's a whole different story. It's a whole different type of movie afterwards. Movies, you had to watch what you did because we had censorship issues back then. And, today we really don't. Well, we do in a way, but we won't go into that. But it's been really a lot of fun. There's a lot of really cool people on there, movie professionals, novices. We have authors on there. We even have movie filmmakers. A lot of very interesting people if you come on and on My Real Life. It's a real fun source of learning about old movies.
The level of, shall we say, focus given to the most might, at least to me, trivial parts of movies that aren't necessarily the Academy Award winners of days gone by the quality of the people doing it, to me, pretty much knocks me on the ground. As you know, we had that great discussion about Mighty Joe Young and the 12 wrestlers in the cabaret scene, which I had started, and I had actually started it erroneously by saying that Tor Johnson was the Swedish Angel. And one of our fellow members, Andy Zamba, came out and said, well, no, Tony, it wasn't him. There was another Swedish Angel, and here he is. And Andy was absolutely correct. Then it came to the story of who were the other 11 wrestlers, and it was like, and I'm sitting there thinking, I thought I was the only kid sitting in, Stamford, Connecticut, let alone the New York metropolitan area, who even gave 2 hoots and 1 holler about what Mighty Joe Young even was.
Yeah. Well, Andy, I know you know Andy DeZamba too, and Andy is a collector of movie memorabilia. And he has a vast knowledge of film history as well. He's also one of the administrators on My Real Life, along with Dan Burke. And the way Dan and I set it up, I told Dan, I said, post something, and that'll be like feeding me, and then I'll embellish on that. And that's pretty much what we do. And every day I will post something about one or two films. They don't have to be classics. They could be something rather obscure. And then we also have another administrator. Her name is Marie Behar-Miani. And she is Joy Behar's niece, not only Joy Behar's niece, but she's also the goddaughter of Ginger Rogers. Yes, the Ginger Rogers, the Sharon Rogers. And her uncles, one was Saul Wurtzel, who was the head of the 20th Century Fox B department. And Wurtzel produced many great films like the Charlie Chan series, the Mr. Motos, the Laurel and Hardy films, many of the Michael Shane pictures, all for 20th Century Fox. And then she has another uncle, Mel Burns, who was head of makeup at RKO. And not only that, Marie was a child star. And she was on television on My Three Sons, Leave It to Beaver, many TV shows. She was in movies. I think she was in The Ten Commandments and many other films from the 1950s. So she has a showbiz background, shall we say? But yeah, we've had a lot of fun with this group.
Yeah, we in my case, my dad worked on Broadway. His behind the stage, both of his brothers did as well. Several of my cousins did, and it's an interesting life, the whole, whatever you want to call it, the movie industry, the theatrical trade, because you're really kind of working all the times, at least, growing up in a family with that. You're really kind of working at all the times. Your dad is working when everybody else's dad is home and vice versa. And you're kind of trying to find a place here in the world, and you really can't find it yet. But yet you're, at least in my case, you're exposed to a lot of movies and different things, and that perhaps I may have an appreciation of that others may not have, probably haven't been around it as much as I have. But, it's like when the bug really hits you, it bites and it stays with you.
Yeah, I mean, I feel sorry for kids today because, you were mentioning before that when we were growing up, we were exposed to these great comedies like Laurel and Hardy and the Three Stooges and Our Gang and so forth. And every day when we come home from school, this is what we look forward to, especially on a rainy day. I mean, these people became our friends. And kids nowadays don't have that anymore. I mean, people of our generation could quote lines from the Three Stooges, Our Gang, and Laurel and Hardy. And we all, each of us know what the other one's talking about. We know what film it came from. But kids today haven't a clue. And it's rather sad, because these are very funny films, and when you do expose children to these films, they're enchanted. Give them about 5 minutes to get used to the black and white.
Yeah.
But they really catch on to it. They grasp this, and it's too bad. I mean, I've often said to people, I wish Turner Classic Movies would do something with their programming for kids. I think every day, Monday through Friday, from 4 to 6 for 2 hours, they should have kids programming. Show a Three Stooges short, throw Laurel and Hardy on, and the same time every day. And then on Saturdays, from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., they should show features like the Tarzan features, the East Side Kids, Laurel and Hardy,
that's what we saw.
Costello, all that stuff. So kids could familiarize themselves with these great comedians. But alas, they're not doing it. Let me be the programmer there.
Yeah, I'll tell you. I mean, it's just that the impressions, and of course, if you watch the Three Stooges in the greater New York metropolitan area, you obviously knew who Officer Joe Bolton was, who would stop the film every 10 minutes because he'd get a call from some irate mother out in Queens whose big brother was hitting little brother over the head with a pipe or a pot or something, and kids don't do that. The Stooges are professionals. This is not for you to do at home. And anyway, it looked like a fun thing to try, even though being the younger brother, I was usually the one getting beaten up on. But But it's really something. And of course, if you look at the movies in those days, it's like, how did all these pieces come about? Today, you know, you go to the movies and you see maybe a couple of previews and you see the movie and out you go and in comes another group. What was a movie show like back then? There was cartoons and news and shorts and all kinds of things.
Cartoons, newsreels, they had serials, short subjects, then the feature, and believe it or not, the trailers would come after the movie. That's why they were called trailers.
I didn't know that.
They were shown after the feature. And, you know, I've often wondered, you know, why do they call them trailers? Well, I found out through the years that they used to show them at the end of the program. But really, you really got your money's worth, and there was just so much entertainment when you'd go to a movie theater back then. I mean, I can recall back in the, you know, late 50s going to movies, and, you know, we would see newsreels, and we'd see a cartoon, and we'd see a short. You know, shorts were on their way out, of course, by the end of the 1950s.
Sure.
The Three Stooges were about the only ones still making shorts around 1958, I think.
Yeah, probably. I guess the last generation of that was Joe Besser, if I recall correctly.
Yes, yeah. Joe Besser had to leave because I think he was taking care of an ailing wife. And so Moe and Larry hired Joe DeRita, and the Three Stooges, I think their last theatrical production was The Outlaws was coming in 1965, and then they did one last film together called Coop's Tour, which I don't think was ever released. That was 1970. I mean, you can see it, I think, on YouTube or wherever, but it's not very good.
Well, yeah, and you know, it was like... you sort of had that original group, you know, Moe, Larry, and Curly. Then you went to Shemp, who kind of brought his own mix to that. And then after that, it was...
You know, Tony, actually, Curly was not the first third stooge.
I didn't know that.
A lot of people don't know that, but it was originally Ted Healy, who was a vaudevillain. He was a childhood friend of Moe Howard's. And they brought in Larry Fine, who did a... I think he did a comic routine with his violin and his wife, and you know, Moe asked Larry, "Hey, you want to be part of Ted Healy and the Stooges?" And they brought in Brother Shemp. And believe it or not, the first film with Ted Healy and the Stooges, it was a film it was a feature by Fox called Soup to Nuts, and it had Moe, Larry, and Shemp. And then Shemp left because I don't think he got along very well with Ted Healy. And Moe brought in his younger brother, Jerome, or Curly. And their first film at MGM, because now Ted Healy and his Stooges went to MGM and they made some shorts. It was a two-strip Technicolor short called Nursery Rhymes from 1933. And they made a few shorts. Hello Pop, which has just been rediscovered. It was a lost film for many years.
Didn't know that.
That was another one. I'm sorry?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was just rediscovered. As a matter of fact, I believe Ron Hutchinson from the Vitaphone Project had posted a few things about it on My Real Life, and they showed it at the Film Forum, I think about a month and a half ago. So a lot of people got to see this lost treasure, and it was lost. But they made a lot of films for MGM, and then after that, Ted Healy went out on his own as a character actor in movies like San Francisco with Clark Gable and Mad Love with Peter Lorre. And Moe, Larry, and Curly went to Columbia, and that's where they really hit pay dirt. Their first short was Woman Haters, and Curly got sick in the mid-40s. He had a number of strokes, and his last film was Half-Lived Holiday. When they were filming that in 1946, he had a stroke during the making of it. And they brought in Shemp. They brought him back to the fold, and Shemp stayed with the Stooges until his heart attack in 1955. That killed him, and then Joe Besser came in, and then Joe DeRita. So that's pretty much the history of the Three Stooges.
Well, you know, I can remember, and I think you can actually find these on YouTube or where I've watched them, is Moe Howard kind of had, well, I mean, how many careers did, I was going to say a second career, But when the Stooges, I guess, pretty much disbanded, or the other fellows were either not well enough to work or had passed on, Mo was kind of a sort of a very popular, kind of informal solo act. He would appear on the Mike Douglas show doing his routines and throwing pies and things like that. And I was watching some of the clips, and I'll tell you, they're fascinating to watch. Here's an elderly Mo, all the inflections, all the grimaces, all the routines, and like he'd do several with Mike Douglas where he's actually covering for Mike, and Mike actually looks silly, like maybe playing the Larry role in the thing, and Mo's kind of like fake cursing at him, and it's and you watch that and you say to yourself, you know, this is I mean, not only the professionalism but the talent this man had and the comedic timing. I mean, it'll knock you on the floor.
Yeah, no, he was an incredible talent, and you know, he was a Shakespearean actor on a riverboat prior to becoming one.
Only on Connecticut Morning, guys, do you find this stuff out. Please continue.
Pardon?
I said only on Connecticut Morning do you find this stuff out. I'm admonishing our audience. Please continue.
Well, you know, I mean, also Shemp, after he left the Stooges initially, he was a first-rate supporting, you know, character actor in many movies, especially at Universal, and he's in countless movies. I mean, he's in Pittsburgh with John Wayne and Randolph Scott and Marlene Dietrich. I mean, so many movies. He's in Abbott and Costello's Buck Privates, and I think he's in the Navy with Abbott and Costello. But, I mean, these guys really worked hard. Curly, on the other hand, prior to joining the Three Stooges, he was in a two-strip Technicolor short called Roast Beef and Movies. And he's teamed with George Gibbet, who was a radio comedian at the time. And, you know, it's just fascinating seeing some of this stuff, you know, Curly being somebody else.
Boy, I'll tell you, you know, you've just caused me to think of something which I think of repeatedly, maybe once or twice a year, maybe every 6 months. I had very good attendance when I went to school. I didn't have perfect attendance. I did go to school one year with somebody with perfect attendance, and I think we gave him the Lou Gehrig Award or something like that. But the one day, and this is 1969, that I was not well enough to go to school in what was then Turner River Junior High School in Stamford, someone went to the Ferguson Library where back then there was a ton of 16mm films. They were on a catalog, and they came out with a movie. And one of my friends had said, "You missed the best day you could have possibly been in school." It was I think a short subject, 1932 or 1933, featuring a man by the name of Gus Van, whom believe me, I only knew Gus Van looking him up after, whom I really, you know, either before or since never really gave him much mind, but he was singing in this thing, "I'm an old cowhand," and ripping off his mustache, and to me, I thought, if there was one day I wanted to be in school, I wanted to see this. And Lou, I cannot find this clip anywhere.
But it's funny you mentioned the Ferguson Library, because it was through the Ferguson Library that I really became interested in movies.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, well, I mean, what happened was I was attending the School of Visual Arts in Manhattan, and my college professor was William K. Everson, the noted film historian, author, archivist, and I saw many great movies in his film history class, and we became very good friends. So I would venture out to New York to his apartment, and at the time I was dating my wife, Sue, and we would go together and we would see these great films. And I had a small collection, mainly Laurel and Hardy films on 16mm. And my wife would say to me, "Well, gee, you know, I heard the Ferguson Library has a really great collection of old movies, classic movies." And every Friday, coming home from work, she would stop at the Ferguson Library and pick up movies to bring home so we could watch them over the weekend. And that's where I really was introduced to movies like North by Northwest, The 39 Steps, The Lady Vanishes, all by Hitchcock, Suspicion. And that's really when everything seemed to ripen for me, when I really wanted to learn more about these films. You know, we saw films like great musicals like Gold Diggers of 1933, Studio, Top Hat. I mean, such great, great entertainment. And, that's, like I said, that's really how my interest really blossomed, so to speak.
And it's amazing, and we have a ton of material to cover, and I know we'll be coming up on a break soon, but as far as, leading out to that, what consistently amazes me, and, I know you are a pre-Code movie fan, 1935, backward maybe to the beginning of the talkie era, the amount of character and quality and substance in these motion pictures and these musicals in the 1930s, when pretty much it was the Depression. I mean, there wasn't like a lot of money all over the place, and somehow Hollywood found the gumption to do all of this. It's something which amazes me to this day.
Yeah. I mean, it depended. The pre-Code era is very interesting. It really depended on what studio made the movie. For instance, MGM, their pre-Code films usually kind of used to overlook the Depression, and their films were more escapist, whereas Warner Brothers, their films were hot off the presses. I mean, they would take, people who were, gangsters and fallen women, and they would capitalize on those themes rather than what MGM was doing. So, it depends. I mean, what studio you like better. I mean, they're both very, very interesting in their content, definitely.
Yeah, it's really an incredible, just an incredible legacy left to us all. Well, I know we're going to be going out for a break soon. Now, I believe that, and it's whatever there's a ton of material here, and you're pitching and I'm catching. So you've sent us 6 very interesting pictures from the movie set of They Were Expendable, and then there's a number of other pictures behind it. So you tell us whatever order you want to go in, and whatever the lead-in is with that, and we and the viewers will be more than happy to follow you along. And,
okay, when we get back, we can talk about They Were Expendable, okay?
Okay, and let me just tell you this. I sat, and for the first time in my life, even though I had seen snippets of it here and there, my wife Kathy and I had watched it on Saturday night, and I've written down a ton of questions for you, which I know you'll have the answers to, but I was really amazed at it. It's just just an incredible work, and kind of interesting in its timing when it came out, and I'm sure we'll get into that as well.
What film was this?
They Were Expendable.
Oh, okay. All right, great.
Yeah.
Okay.
So with that, we'll be heading out for a break. Tony D'Angelo here with our dear guest Lou Sabini on Connecticut Morning. We will head out for a commercial, and we will see you back here in just a bit. Thanks for being with us. The Erskine Hawkins Orchestra, tipping in 1945, which is the year of the movie They Were Expendable, which Lou Sabini, our fine guest, is a connoisseur of. Lou is, from what I can see, the historian, the expert, the connoisseur of this particular movie. And Lou, as we were saying before the break, I've watched this movie on Saturday with my wife Kathy, and it was an amazing, amazing piece of film. I mean, where it started, really that early Pacific campaign, and really bringing it up to where, shall we say, the collapse of the Philippines and the characterizations of the people involved. And to me it was riveting, and it was just really a piece of American history, and the characterizations of the people faced with what they were faced with, to me was just both enduring and endearing. Tell us what got you started about this particular movie, the still photographs, your future projects concerning it. I find this to be a remarkable story.
Okay, well, first of all, I want to thank you for all the compliments about my so-called expertise as far as They Were Expendable goes. But, I mean, there are people who, I know people like Scott Iman, who is a John Ford, John Wayne scholar, who probably knows far more about the movie than I do, but thank you very much. The way all this started was, I guess it was probably probably about 2 years ago almost. Um, Dan Burke from the Historical Society sent me a couple of photographs via email, and Dan was always sending me stuff like this, if it was pertaining to movies. And one was a picture of a young sailor sitting on a naval vehicle with Robert Montgomery, and the other one was a picture of John Ford lying on the ground speaking to John Wayne, Robert Montgomery, and Jack Holt. And Dan knew what these pictures were from, so he was kind of kidding me along, and he asked me, Lou, can you identify these two pictures? And I said, sure. They were Expendable. It looks like these were shot, on Key Biscayne, where they shot the movie. They did the location shooting in Key Biscayne. And he said, you're right. So I asked him, I said, well, who took these? And he said, well, the guy sitting with Robert Montgomery, his name is Nick Scuddy.
Ah.
And Nick is a professional photographer. He's retired now, lives here in Stamford, Connecticut. And my mother was living with us at the time. And, I turned to my mother and I said, Ma, does the name Nick Scuddy mean anything to you? And she said, oh, yes. He's my younger brother Burt Longo's best friend. And I said, no kidding. And so I got back to Dan, and I told Dan, I said, I'd love to maybe interview Nick and ask him about his day on the set of They Were Expendable. Maybe he might have a story. I could write an article for The Advocate or some movie journal like Classic Images. And Dan gave me his phone number. So I called Nick up, and I said, Nick, I'd like to come over and interview you about They Were Expendable. He said, sure. So I believe it was on a Monday. It was a holiday, and my wife was off from school, so she came with me. She had her pen and pad in hand, and I had my little questionnaire. So we went into Nick's house, and we sat down, and I asked him, I said, so Nick, tell me about your day on the set of They Were Expendable. He said, a day on the set. He said, Lou, the whole shoot was 30 days, and I was there every day. I was working for the Naval Military Lab down in Miami, and John Ford had invited a lot of the sailors there to just, come and watch them film the movie. And Nick had the wherewithal to bring his camera with him. And I asked him, I said, so Nick, you just took the two pictures? He said, no, Lou, I took 138 photographs. And so he pulled them out, and he showed them to me. And, we were at his house for quite a long time, and every picture that I was looking at, Nick had a story about every single picture. His memory was just so vivid. How he met John Wayne, how he met Robert Montgomery. The one picture, I don't know whether you have it there.
Well, we have a sequence of 6, and I...
Yeah, you know what? Why don't you throw one of them on right now, if that's okay.
Okay, and I'm just
we'll go from there.
Which is fine, and I'm just going from left to right, and what I have appearing on my screen is a picture of John Wayne shirtless.
Okay, well that was the first day of the shoot. And apparently what happened there was, there it is. Apparently what happened, John Wayne was walking around, and Nick was there with his trusty camera, and he walked up to John Wayne rather apprehensively, and he said, Mr. Wayne, could I take your picture? And John Wayne said, sure, if you'll give me a cigarette. So Nick gave him a cigarette, and there you see John Wayne holding the cigarette that Nick had given him. But he said that John Wayne was really a terrific guy, and I've never heard a bad thing about him. There are people out there who disagree with his politics, but even people who do, who have met him, they still say he was a lovely, lovely person, a really nice guy, and very genuine.
Yeah.
So anyhow, Nick, some other good stories about when he was there on during the location shooting. I asked him, I said, so you had to go to Key Biscayne because all books, including MGM Publicity, claim that the movie was shot on Key Biscayne. And he said, Lou, we didn't set foot on Key Biscayne. He said, if we had to take a PT boat from the Miami shoreline to Key Biscayne, it would take us over an hour to get there by PT boat with all that film equipment and everything. He said when we did go to an island, we went to a little uncharted island that we called the Coconut Island, where they would just, there were a lot of coconuts on there, and that's what they called it. He said it was a 20-minute boat ride. And on their initial ride out there, Nick was on a PT boat. He's sitting on the deck because there are no chairs there. And John Ford came over to him, and he sat next to him on the deck. And Ford asked Nick, he said, "So, Nick, tell me about yourself." And Nick said, "Well, I'm from Stamford, Connecticut, and and so Ford asked him, "Well, what are you interested in?" "Well, I'm interested in photography." And Ford said, "Well, I'll introduce you to Burt Lynch, who was the MGM studio still photographer, who took all the publicity stills for the movie." And
Amazing.
So Burt took Nick under his wing and taught Nick so much. Nick told me he still uses these same methods today when he's taking pictures. And there are pictures in this collection of Burt Lynch at work. And, I mean, there's just so many fascinating stories. And I was talking to Scott Iman, who incidentally is writing the foreword to my book. And Scott, as I told you, he's the John Ford scholar. He's just finished a book on John Wayne. It's probably a quintessential John Wayne biography. And he asked me, he said, "So they were on Key Biscayne, right?" And I said, no, believe it or not, they were not on Key Biscayne. And so he was very shocked to hear that. Another good story was that John Ford had shot, there was a scene that was filmed but deleted. They shot it on location of a Catholic priest. And they built a mock church, a chapel, made out of bamboo. And there are all these great shots of the priest. And John Ford always claims, and this is also documented, that the priest was played by Wallace Ford, who, you might remember him in movies like Freaks, The Informer, Alfred Hitchcock's Shadow of a Doubt.
Right.
Well, Ford was suffering from a rose-colored memory. It wasn't Wallace Ford. It was actor Pedro de Cordova who played the priest, and we have photographs of him in this collection. So there's a lot of very pleasant surprises. Another thing that Scott Iman didn't know, and others did not know, was that silent actor Richard Barthelmess came to the set to visit. And we have photographs of him talking to Ford and Bob Montgomery and others. I mean, there's just so many fascinating photographs that Nick took. I mean, he was definitely, there at the right time. And he spoke to everybody on the set. I mean, Ward Bond, he spoke to Jack Holt, Jack Pennick, who appears in virtually every John Ford film practically, Murray Alper, Selmer Jackson, I mean, many, Charlie, I'm trying to think of the guy's name. He played the father in The Grapes of Wrath. It'll come to me in a minute.
Now, Lou, if...
But anyhow,
no, please continue.
I'm sorry?
No, please continue.
No. No, but I mean, he took pictures of all these great stars. Unfortunately, all the actresses, like Donna Reed, were not present at the location shooting. All that other footage was shot in Culver City at MGM.
Interesting.
So, a large portion of the film was shot off the coast of Miami, but a lot of it was shot at MGM.
What piqued my attention is in the sequence of 6 slides, there is a slide number 67 where 2 gentlemen are standing. And the gentleman to the left, is that Ward Bond?
Okay, for some reason, I'm looking at my screen here, and it's gone black. So I'm not really seeing it here. Let's see. I don't know what to tell you because I'm not seeing it here.
Well, I mean...
Can you describe the picture?
Yeah, it's 2 gentlemen, one with sunglasses and a cigarette. He's shirtless, and he has his arm around...
that is Ward Bond, yes.
Right.
That's a classic picture. What happened on the set was that it was lunchtime. This was the first day of shooting.
Mm-hmm.
And Nick had already approached John Wayne and asked him, Wayne asked him for the cigarette. So Nick was with a buddy of his. They were both photographers. And Nick saw John Wayne sitting there with Ward Bond having lunch. And Nick walked up to Ward Bond and he said, "Excuse me, Mr. Bond, can I please take your picture?" And Ward Bond said, "Nah, can't you see a reason? Get out of here." So John Wayne stopped him and admonished him. He said, "Whoa, Ward, wait a minute. Go ahead, son, take our picture." And Ward Bond pretty much refused. He turned to the side. Oh, I see the picture now. It just popped up. He turned to the side and he held his arms up so they wouldn't get the photograph. But this picture that we're looking at right now with Ward Bond with the sunglasses, this was the following day. Nick was with his buddy again. They're walking along, and he saw Ward Bond shirtless coming their way. And Nick kind of thought, well, I'm steering clear of this guy. And as they passed, Ward Bond stopped and he said, "Hey, aren't you the guy that wanted to take my picture yesterday?" And he said, "Yes." He said, "Well, you ready to take my picture now?" So here's Ward Bond flexing, holding his gut in, really hamming it up for Nick's buddy, and it's a wonderful picture. I mean, that picture really is one of the best in the collection.
Now, Ward Bond and John Wayne had a number of common films, if I'm not mistaken. They had acted in lots of them.
As a matter of fact, the two of them, first of all, they were playing, when they were in college, they were at UCLA, if I'm not mistaken, and they were playing football. And during the summer, they went to work at the Fox Studios, where John Ford was employed. And they got jobs in scripts. They would carry things around, carry equipment around. And Ford noticed John Wayne and thought, oh, these two guys, they're nice-looking guys. And John Wayne was in a few silent films, most notably in a 1928 silent, directed by Ford, called Hangman's House. And Ward Bond, the two of them, they remained best friends up until Ward Bond's death in 1960.
Yeah, and when we had Denny Miller on, Denny Miller had mentioned that Ward Bond was really his, shall we say, his anchor into acting. Denny Miller didn't think he could cut it at all, but Ward Bond on Wagon Train, who was a former athlete, kind of took him aside and said, "Hey kid, this is easy, this is what you have to do." And Denny Miller credits Ward Bond to the fact that he had a very long acting career, because he says without that he would have just floundered out of motion pictures and television and into something else. So
I hadn't known that. That's very interesting.
And it's kind of interesting how the whole thing sort of winds together. So believe it or not, we're coming up on a hard break, and we'd like to get right back into this. So it's Tony D'Angelo here on Connecticut Morning with Lou Sabini. We will be jumping out here for a break, and we'll get Lou right back on to talk about They Were Expendable and some of the other fine pictures which he has been so kind to send along. Right back at you right after this. We're going to start this, I think, on Connecticut Morning. Name the bump, and maybe we'll give out prizes, because there's so much great bump music. If you can name that bump, email me, and I'll give you a prize. Not going to tell you what it is, though. Tony D'Angelo back here on Connecticut Morning with Lou Sabini. And Lou, when we're back on They Were Expendable, the shooting in 1945, this particular picture here caught my eye, and this is the second in the sequence. It's looks like a filming with palm trees and a number of people around a camera. And you tell me, every picture tells a story, and you tell me the story this one's telling us.
Okay, well, there is John Ford with the baseball hat, in the foreground, looking through the viewfinder of the camera, lining up the shot, and Robert Montgomery is the one who's being shot. There's a studio grip there holding not a palm tree, but like the branch from a palm tree,
right?
To give the effect, with the shadows. And Nick Scuddy took this picture. He was on a ladder behind John Ford. They allowed him to come that close and take this photograph. So this is just a marvelous picture. And when Nick told me, he said, I was only right behind John Ford when we were shooting the movie. I was always there, and he really was. Mm-hmm. It's just these pictures. When I saw them, I just flipped, because no other. I can't think of any other book, and my book is going to be published through McFarland, incidentally. The manuscript is being submitted by the end of this month, and then McFarland is going to go to work on it. but I know of no other book which has chronicled the filming or the partial filming of a classic movie like this. You know, I mean, if there's anybody else who's done something similar, like Nick, been to a movie location and shot a bunch of pictures, get in touch with me, because I would love to do this again. This was a lot of fun, this project, and something very dear to my heart.
Well, you know, and I think of the old admonition, if you like sausage, don't ever look to see how sausage is made. It's really kind of the opposite with films, because films really, the making of them and the backstories really have their own fascination and their own inner beauty, especially when you sort of marry yourself to a film. Wow, that's how that was done, and it just it's really kind of a gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a downside to it, too, because there is a lot of waiting on a film set. You know, I mean, you have these cameramen, they have to set things up.
Right.
There's a lot of conversation. There's a lot of downtime, and it gets very boring. I mean, I've been on a film set with my wife, and my wife was an extra in a movie called Everybody Wins, which was the last film that Carol Reese directed. I believe it was in 1989, and it starred Nick Nolte and Deborah Winger. And my wife's in the last shot of the movie. So anyhow, but I mean, there's a lot of waiting around. It's very tedious. It's boring, and I could never do it. I mean, one thing that that Nick did say about John Ford was that very rarely would he take more than one take, and a lot of the times these guys would get it right. There was a fellow on the set, and he was on the set of every Ford film. He's in almost every Ford film as an extra and an actor. His name was Jack Pennick. And Jack knew everything. He wasn't an assistant director. He was an assistant to the assistant. But Jack knew everything that Ford wanted. If Ford wanted something, Jack would get it. And he would know Ford's next move. Nick was just saying the guy was incredible. The assistant director on They Were Expendables, John Ford's brother, Edward O'Ferna. Mm-hmm. And there are pictures of him in the collection, too. Nick didn't know who he was. And he kept on asking me in some of the photographs, who is this guy? And I really didn't know either. And a very good friend of mine, Karen Everson, who's the wife of William K. Everson, she was able to identify him for me. And, you know, there were a lot of people who did help me out. There were some things I just didn't know. And they did help me. A friend of mine, John McElwee, sent me 3 production stills from They Were Expendable. And there's a photograph of John Wayne and Robert Montgomery talking to a nurse. It's just before they go in to visit that dying sailor.
Yes.
And I had no idea who the nurse was. And I was thinking of not even using the photograph because I didn't know who that nurse was. So I posted the picture on my real life, and we found out her name was Eve March. And she did very little, but I mean, her name is Eve March, and we did find out that was she. And you know, that's getting back to my real life. There's so many wonderful people on there who have helped me, who've cleared up some things that I've wanted to know for years, and I could never find out. So.
It's really something, and. You know, when you look at this, and this is what fascinated me particularly about They Were Expendable, again, watching it from beginning to end, the first time, you know, in 2013, the timing of the movie's release was actually a little bit after World War II, and it seemed like a movie that probably you might have saw a couple of years before. Because it really had like a very open-ended ending. It was a case of, okay, the officers will go back to Washington to tell us how to work with PT boats. The enlisted men, we don't know what became of them. We don't know what became of the nurses. At least you wouldn't have known at that particular time. And one of the commentaries that I had read in one of the reviews was perhaps this movie will be off time because we as a society, America in 1945, we're all kind of beyond that right now and looking at the next thing. And I don't know, do you think this movie could have had a lot more acclaim had it have been a year earlier or a year and a half earlier?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the movie was shot in March of 1945. And, I think March and April of 1945 they shot the film. And it wasn't released until December of 1945. And we were well out of the war. People didn't want to see war movies anymore. Luckily, the movie did get very good reviews. I don't think it was, I don't remember right now, but I don't think it was one of the top box office attractions that year. But today, when looking at it, it's probably considered the probably the very best film about World War II, in my opinion, anyhow. No, I think in many other people's opinions. I mean, we have other films, of this particular type of film. I mean, there are great movies, movies about the returning veteran, movies like The Best Years of Our Lives, or The Prize of the Marines, or movies about the POW, movies like The Purple Heart with Dana Andrews and Farley Granger. But I think as far as the actual war, they were expendable. It is the very best.
Well, I'll tell you what really gripped me in this movie. Maybe gripped me is not an apt term, but caught me. The characterization of the very, 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 very young Marshall Thompson playing the junior lieutenant. And I had to look twice and say, my God, that's Marshall Thompson.
Yeah, Marshall Thompson.
And he played that part, shall we say, the semi-officious kid out of the academy who was trying to find his way among, all the blue jackets, as it were. And, it just really, really, really struck me. And I'd be curious to get from Nick as to how, here he is, he's a kid actor, and he's with these, heavyweight greats, and how he kind of interacted with John Ford and John Wayne and Robert Montgomery. It was kind of like, hey kid, here's your scene, okay, go sit in the corner. Or did they really kind of take him in and, be a friend to him?
Yeah, I don't know. Nick really didn't talk about that much. I mean, the same thing can be said about Cameron Mitchell.
Right, a young Cameron Mitchell.
Photograph in the collection of Cameron Mitchell sitting off to the side with another sailor waiting to be called onto the set. But then there's another great one of Cameron Mitchell and John Wayne fooling around. And it's a marvelous picture of the two of them. I mean, as you know, Cameron Mitchell lived here in Stamford, Connecticut for a spell.
Yes, he did.
And but as far as Marshall Thompson, there's a funny story that goes with about him. Apparently, he had this scene where he had this, it was a long scene with a lot of dialogue. He had this big long speech to make, and he said that he went home and he memorized the whole speech, ready to go on the set the next day. And Ford had told him, "You know your speech when you come on the set tomorrow." So this kid memorizes the speech, he comes on, he's gung-ho, and Ford came over to him with a little slip of paper, and he said, "Forget the speech, this is all you say," and it was one line of dialogue. I mean, typical Ford stories, I love listening to John Ford's story. I mean, he would do that to actors. I mean, he could be very abusive. I know that he was very abusive to John Wayne during this film, because Wayne, as we all know, was not in the military. And there was a reason for that. Number one, he had all those kids. But number two, another reason was Wayne was under non-exclusive contract to Republic Pictures. And Herbert Yates, the president of the Republic, said that John Wayne would be definitely more important working home, making propaganda films, working at the home front, than going overseas fighting. And apparently they agreed, but John Ford used to really make fun of Wayne. And whenever any kind of military VIPs would visit the set, Ford would not include John Wayne. John Wayne would always be sitting off in the corner by himself, but Robert Montgomery was always there, but never John Wayne. And, as a matter of fact, there's one story where Ford said, there was a scene being shot with Wayne and Montgomery, and they're saluting, some VIP, some naval bigwig. And Ford said, "Okay, guys, take it again." And they did it again. And Ford didn't like that. He said, "Let's do it again. Let's do it again." And all of a sudden, John Wayne turns to Bob Montgomery, and he said, "Hey, what are we doing wrong?" And all of a sudden, John Ford blurts out and starts yelling at John Wayne, and there's expletives used. I won't use them on the radio, but he pretty much screamed at John Wayne. He said, "For crying out loud, can't you learn how to salute?" And John Wayne was taken aback, and Robert Montgomery walked over to Ford and he said, "Look, don't ever talk to Duke like that again, because if you do, I'm walking off of this picture." And he walked back to John Wayne. He turned around. He looked at John Ford. And he said, "It didn't look like John Ford was about ready to cry."
It's
I mean,
amazing.
John Ford, I'm sorry.
It's just an amazing work, and it's I just stand in awe of the stories and the pictures and everything that you've sent.
There's so many great stories in the book. I asked Nick. I said, "So how did John Ford direct?" He said, "Well, they would go into, and there's many pictures like this. They would go off into a corner, John Wayne and the principal actors who were going to work in the scene, and they would stand there for 10, 20 minutes, and it would be an intense conversation. I mean, a lot of pondering, but then when Ford would speak, they would all be listening intently. And, then they'd go to it, but he said there was no real yelling on the set. He said Ford was very quiet. He'd always be puffing his pipe.
Mm-hmm.
That was pretty much it. I mean, Nick said there was one time he saw Ford virtually blow up at some studio stagehands, and that was when there was a scene where a Jeep was to take off, and the stagehands threw gravel underneath the rear tires to make all this dust, smoke.
Right.
And Ford blew up, and he said, "I didn't want that." And he started screaming and swearing at the studio stagehands and made a big deal of it. But aside from that, he said it was a pretty calm production. Everybody seemed to be having a lot of fun. And he said it was very, very hot. If there was anybody on the set, like Jack Holt plays a naval bigwig on the film.
Yes.
And every time he would finish shooting, Ford would make Jack Holt take his jacket off or his shirt off, and he'd be standing there with no shirt because it wouldn't be proper to be showing anybody, the higher ups, one of the higher ups perspiring. Just after all, this was, in Miami, and it was very hot when they shot the film.
Well understood. And one picture here really caught my eye, and it's two gentlemen sitting in a Jeep, sort of parallel between two palm trees, and this would be in the sequence. This would be number 5 of 6. I believe that's Robert Montgomery on the right and the Robert Montgomery, I guess, well, actually twofold, at least from what I had read after I had watched the movie, is he had actually worked a PT boat during the actual war, and, of course, who was Robert Montgomery? He's the father of Elizabeth Montgomery, better known to this generation as Samantha Stevens in Bewitched. My parents would see Elizabeth Montgomery on TV and say, "Oh, it's Robert Montgomery's daughter." That's kind of how I got to sort of make the connection. But he actually did command a PT boat, from what I was reading.
Yes, he did, as a matter of fact. And this picture is very interesting. The gentleman on the left is Nick Scuddy, and I'll tell you about exactly what happened with this picture. This was taken during lunch one day. And Nick was with his buddy again. They were walking along, and Nick saw Robert Montgomery eating his lunch. Robert Montgomery used to venture out on his own. He wouldn't eat with everybody else. He liked to be alone, and he would sit wherever. And one day he was sitting on this military vehicle eating his lunch, and Nick walked by, and he said, "Mr. Montgomery, can we take a picture of you?" He said, "Sure." So he took the picture, and just as they were leaving, he said, "Why don't you boys sit down and have lunch with me?" So they did, and they hung out sitting with Robert Montgomery. He said that Montgomery was the nicest person you could ever meet. I mean, nothing like a movie star. There was one story when, I guess, a few days later, everybody was in line getting chow, picking up their lunch. And Nick would always make sure that all the actors and the technicians and everybody else would go ahead of him. And then he'd get in line with the rest of the sailors. Well, this particular day, Nick happened to turn around and he saw Robert Montgomery 4 people behind him. And he said, "Oh, Mr. Montgomery, here, come on, you can get in front of me." And Montgomery looked at him and he said, "No, thanks, son." He said, "We're all equal here." And, Nick just thought, wow, this is really such a good guy. Other days, Montgomery, after lunch, if there was time, he would borrow somebody's, there was a sailor in Miami who was riding around on his motorcycle, and Montgomery would go bombing around on this guy's motorcycle. We have photographs of that, too, in the book. I mean, there's just so many cool stories you could tell about this movie, when they were shooting it. And, Robert Montgomery, he started in movies at MGM in the early sound era. One of his first films, he played the romantic juvenile leading man in a Buster Keaton film. As a matter of fact, it was Keaton's first talkie, called Free and Easy from 1930. And then he went on, usually playing boy next door types. He had some pretty notable films in the 1930s, like Private Lives from 1931 with Norma Shearer. And he was in, many other films. Probably one of his most notable films came in '37. He did. He played the lead in the Emlyn Williams play Night Must Fall, and he saw the play on Broadway in 1936, and he really wanted to play the lead. He wanted MGM to buy the rights to the play, and they did, and Montgomery got to play the lead. But when Louis B. Mayer saw the film content, he was appalled, because this movie is about a killer, a mass murderer who decapitates women and puts their heads in boxes, in a box. And it's a really black movie, but it's a wonderful film. Montgomery was nominated for Best Actor, but Louis B. Mayer wanted nothing of that film, and the film it had a very short release date. I think it only played in theaters about a week or two, and they withdrew it. And Mayer really sought to get Spencer Tracy for his role as Manuel, the fisherman in Captain's Courageous. He really wanted him to win the Best Actor Oscar, even though Montgomery had been nominated for Night Must Fall. In my opinion, Montgomery's performance is much better than Tracy's performance was in Captain's Courageous. But, after Montgomery left MGM, he went to Columbia. Another notable film he did was Here Comes Mr. Jordan, which was remade as Heaven Can Wait with Warren Beatty and James Mason years later. But it was during they were expendable. Ford happened to break his leg during the making of the film. While he was lying in hospital, he asked Robert Montgomery to finish the picture for him, which he did. And Montgomery enjoyed the experience so much of directing, the rest of They Were Expendable, that he became a director himself. And he directed two excellent film noirs, one for MGM called Lady in the Lake, and then he did another one of my favorites from 1947, Ride the Pink Horse.
Ah, Andrea King. I should have put her on my favorite actresses list.
Well, who's that?
Andrea King.
Oh, yeah. Oh, wow. I didn't realize you'd even know who Andrea King was.
Oh, classic beauty, perfect diction. Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Wanda Hendricks is in that. She later became Mrs. Audie Murphy.
Yes, and that's quite a story in and of itself. When you look at Robert Montgomery, and of course, who didn't love Elizabeth Montgomery? And you can picture if you were taking and this would happen to me. You'd picture if you were going to take Elizabeth Montgomery out on a date, a young Elizabeth Montgomery, and you're terrified, and you show up at the door, which I'm sure is some mansion, like probably in my mind's eye, way up at the North Stamford border, and you'd knock at the door, and out would come Robert Montgomery, like with an ascot and a smoking jacket and a pipe, sort of staring you down. That was always the impression I had of that dynamic. I know I should apply my mind to more constructive things.
It could be rather intimidating. I mean, from what I understand, he and his daughter had a not the greatest relationship in the world, because I think they were both on opposite corners. Robert Montgomery was a conservative, and his daughter was very liberal. So I don't think they had the greatest relationship, the two of them. I know he had a son who he was very close with, but I always loved Elizabeth Montgomery when I was a kid. I always thought to myself when I was watching Bewitched, if I ever get married, I want to marry someone just like her, because I used to think she was gorgeous and such a wonderful personality.
Yeah,
It's too bad she passed away so young.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, she never ever, from what I understand, I heard her interviewed. She never ever wanted to do a reunion type show. I guess she just felt that that was fine for what it was, and that's great, and let it stand. And you know, she never, as so many do, want to do reunion shows, more often to their detriment. But you know, she was very clear about that. That was then, and this is now, and she did whatever she did. And until, you're right, she passed on at too young of an age.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Robert Montgomery was, you know, he used to hang around. I think one of his best friends was James Cagney, and I have a funny story to tell to tell you about that. Years ago, when I was working with my family business as a salesperson at Sabini's Furniture, there was a couple who came into our store, and they had lived in Dutchess County, and they were buying a bedroom set from me. And I had asked them, I said, wow, Dutchess County. I said, you ever see James Cagney? And they said, yeah, once at a restaurant. And I said, no kidding. And they said, yes, he was with Robert Montgomery, and Cagney was with his wife, and Robert Montgomery was with his wife, and they were waiting in line to get into the restaurant. And so this customer of mine, he didn't know who Cagney was, didn't recognize Robert Montgomery, but he recognized Cagney as somebody. So he walked up to him and he said, wait a minute, aren't you? And Cagney looked at him and he said, no, I'm his brother. And he winked at him and smiled. So I just thought that was a cute story.
yeah, you know, I had a friend years back who was an architect who lived in, I guess it would be in the Westport area, and he said he would stop for coffee every morning, and sitting at the counter reading the newspaper, talking to whosoever was there, was Jason Robards, and you could just kind of see that, hey, how you doing? You know, it's like...
Yeah, well, he was in Wilton, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's,
yeah. I mean, he probably would go to Westport for coffee. I mean, Paul Newman, you know, was another fixture, and then Joanne Woodward, another fixture in Westport, and you'd see them occasionally. I had a long conversation once with Joanne Woodward. She was just such a sweetheart. I understand she's not doing well now, but,
yeah.
You know.
I know when my first wife, my late wife Jean, would shop for dresses in the Talbots in Westport, the girls would always say, oh, you should have been here yesterday, Joanne Woodward was in. And then it's like, you know, yeah, I should have been there yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, when I was in the furniture business, one day I happened to be, you know, we were slow, and in walks this elderly woman with her daughter. And I was with this other woman, and she said, I think your customer is Joanne Woodward. And I said, really? And I put my glasses on, and I looked, and I turned to my associate, Kathy, and I said, yeah, it is. So I walked over to her, and, you know, I just helped her, and when we were all done, she said to me, well, Lou, you've been very, very kind. Yes, I'd like to buy this item. So I'm writing out the order. And she said, well, don't you want my name? And I said, well, I know who you are. And she looked a little upset with me, and she put her hand up as though, okay, no more. I don't want to talk anymore about who I am or anything like that. And I was getting a little nervous, and I thought, gee, I got to break the ice somehow. So I said to her, and this is a true story, I turned to her and I said, you know, Miss Woodward, you coming in here today is a real coincidence to me. And she said, why? I said, well, you know, yesterday my wife came home with a movie she wanted me to see. And she said, Lou, I just brought home this movie. I'm dying for us to see it. It's called Road to Perdition. And I turned to my wife and I said, well, no thanks to, I've seen all the Bob Hope, Bing Crosby road pictures. And so Joanne laughed and she said, do you like old movies? And I said, yes. And I told her a little bit about myself. And she said, you have home theater in your house? I said, yeah, we show them on film. We don't do it on DVD. We do have a DVD player and we do have a video projector, but we show a lot of the stuff on film. And she said, well, what format? I said, 16 millimeter. She said, well, Pop and I have 16 millimeter too. Do you think I could borrow any of your films? And I said, sure, if you ever want to, that'll be fine. And she said, Lou, what's your favorite movie? And I happened to tell her it's of Mice and Men, the 1939.
Which way did he go, George?
And she says to me, "Oh, I worked with Betty Field," and her daughter chimed in. She said, "Well, who's Betty Field?" So Joanne Woodward told her, and all of a sudden she comes up with the most curious question. She said, "Lou, do you have any Universal horror films?" I said, "What, you mean like Frankenstein and Dracula?" She said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, I've got The Bride of Frankenstein, I've got The Old Dark House, I've got a few others." She said, "Oh, do you happen to have my favorite one?" I said, "What?" She said, "The Mummy with Boris Karloff." She said, "That's my favorite movie."
The real Karloff.
And she got up and she started imitating the way Boris Karloff walked in The Mummy. And I just couldn't believe this. I mean, so we were talking for about 40 minutes, and in the meantime, another customer was waiting for me. And I looked at and the lady was waiting quite a while by this time, about 20 minutes. And I turned to the woman, I said, "I'm so sorry, but I'll be right with you." And she said, "Not at all. I am enjoying this conversation." so I mean, it was a lot of fun, but she was really a very special lady in my eyes.
A lot of fun, and Lou, you're a lot of fun, and we're out of time, regrettably, and we never seem to have enough. Where can our friends and fans reach you, and where can they keep track of when your book will be released and your other endeavors?
Well, actually, you could check out my website. It's www.lousabini.org, and you could find me on Facebook. You could go on to My Real, REEL, Life, and if you want to join, just put in a request, and you'll be on there. And I had a lot of fun with this today, Tony, and thank you very much.
Oh, listen, and
we'll do it again sometime.
we'll certainly do it in the new year, because it's like movies are like what Howard Cosell used to say about boxing in the 1960s on The Wide World of Sports. They feed off of their own energy, my friend. That's all I can tell you. Have a great day. Best to Sue, and have a great holiday if I don't speak, but I know we'll be communicating, and take care, and thanks so much.
Okay, thank you, and the same to you.
That was Lou Sabini.
Stop over for movies some night.
I got to get down there. I got to work out the logistics, but I'd love to see it, and that would really be a treat. Thanks so much.
Okay, you're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And that was Lou Sabini, my friend and film historian. We will be coming back with some classic clips of the month of November and days gone by. Tony D'Angelo in Connecticut Morning. Stay with us. Hopefully the best is still to come. It's kind of hard to top that.